Every small town harbors its own legends, but in Riverside, the legend wasn't carved in stone or cast in bronze. It lived quietly in the corner booth of Murphy's Diner, where Samuel Torres sat every morning at precisely 6:42 a.m., his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee. The brass bell above the diner's cherry-red door chimed its familiar welcome as Samuel stepped inside, his shoulders slightly hunched from years of carrying burdens others couldn't see. The morning air hung thick with the aroma of fresh biscuits and sizzling bacon, while steam danced upward from the kitchen like morning mist over a lake. He moved with the measured pace of a man who understood that some rituals were sacred. "Morning, honey," called out Rita, the silver-haired waitress whose smile had welcomed countless souls over 3 decades. She was already reaching for the coffee pot before he'd even settled into his usual spot. Samuel offered the ghost of a smile and slid into the booth, placing a small leather journal beside the napkin dispenser with the reverence of someone handling a prayer book. His coat, faded olive green with patches that told stories he'd never shared, hung on his frame like an old friend's embrace. The fabric was worn thin at the elbows, frayed at the cuffs, but clean and carefully maintained. On the left shoulder, barely visible beneath the fold, sat a triangular patch so faded its original colors had surrendered to time. Samuel unfolded the Riverside Herald with practiced precision, creating his morning sanctuary of newsprint and ritual. The familiar routine had become as essential to the town's rhythm as the church bells on Sunday morning. No one questioned Samuel's past. They simply accepted his presence like sunrise itself. His order never varied: buttermilk pancakes with real maple syrup, 2 strips of bacon cooked until they snapped, and coffee black as midnight. He always left exactly $4 under his saucer before the food arrived, a habit that had puzzled newcomers for years. At 6:47 a.m. sharp, the diner's tranquility shattered as Marcus Webb burst through the door, bringing with him a whirlwind of cold air and barely contained ambition. His expensive suit jacket flapped behind him like the wings of an agitated bird, and his leather briefcase bulged with the importance of someone who believed busyness equaled significance. "Big day ahead, people," Marcus announced to no one in particular, his voice carrying the forced enthusiasm of a man desperate to be noticed. He made a beeline for the counter, dropping his briefcase with theatrical flair. "Triple shot espresso today, Rita." The Veterans Day Committee meeting ran until midnight, and we're nowhere near ready. Rita's eyebrow arched with the practiced skepticism of someone who'd seen countless self-important storms blow through her diner. "How about starting with some manners, sugar?" Marcus chuckled, but his laugh held the hollow ring of someone unaccustomed to being challenged. His gaze swept the diner until it landed on Samuel's quiet corner. "Still claiming the throne, I see," he muttered, loud enough to ensure his words carried. "Must be nice having a reserved table when the rest of us have to wait." Rita's movements stilled as she carried Samuel's breakfast across the worn linoleum. She set the plate down with deliberate care, her voice dropping to a tone that commanded attention. "That man once threw himself between my grandson and a runaway delivery truck on Maple Street. Took the hit himself, spent 3 days in the hospital, and never said a word about it. Just paid his bill and walked home like nothing happened." The color drained from Marcus's face. I didn't know. "Lot of things you don't know, sweetheart," Rita replied, returning to her post behind the counter with the dignity of someone who'd witnessed true character. Undeterred by the rebuke, Marcus approached Samuel's booth with the swagger of someone who'd never learned when to retreat. Samuel didn't acknowledge his presence, turning newspaper pages with the methodical patience of someone who'd mastered the art of selective attention. "That jacket's seen better days," Marcus observed, his tone carrying mock concern. "Looks like it belongs in a museum, or maybe a donation bin." His eyes fixed on the faded patch, now partially visible. "Hope it holds together long enough for the parade." The newspaper in Samuel's hands grew still. Rita froze mid-motion at the coffee machine, her eyes finding Samuel's face. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of unspoken history, of sacrifices that demanded no recognition, of dignity that needed no defense. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, finally recognizing he'd wandered into territory beyond his understanding. He tapped the table twice with nervous fingers. Anyway, big week ahead. I'll leave you to your routines. As the door closed behind him, morning sunlight streamed through the diner's fogged windows, catching the brass fixtures and casting everything in golden relief. The light found Samuel's jacket patch, illuminating it just enough to reveal what observant eyes might see. A symbol that spoke of service beyond civilian understanding. The Garden of Memory by 6:03 a.m. every Monday. While most of Riverside still slept beneath heavy quilts, Samuel Torres was already moving through Memorial Gardens like a caretaker of sacred ground. Morning mist clung to the bronze statues and winding gravel paths, creating an ethereal cathedral where silence felt like prayer. He carried a canvas bag filled with cleaning cloths, a thermos of hot coffee that steamed in the cool air, and a small American flag still crisp from its packaging. His knees protested as he knelt before the weathered plaque of Lieutenant Marcus Sullivan, but pain was a small price for remembrance. With gentle precision, he wiped away the morning dew, polished the engraved name until it gleamed, and straightened the miniature flag that had been knocked askew by weekend winds. One of the marigolds in the memorial vase had surrendered to autumn's touch. Samuel replaced it with the care of someone tending his own family's grave, adjusting the remaining flowers until they stood in perfect tribute. Sir, this area is restricted until the city crew completes setup. Marcus Webb's voice cut through the morning tranquility like a blade through silk. He approached with a clipboard clutched against his chest like armor, his authority borrowed from bureaucracy rather than earned through respect. Samuel rose slowly, his movements carrying the patience of someone who'd heard louder orders in far more dangerous places. He didn't speak, simply gestured toward the memorial vase with quiet dignity. We're marking zones for the Veterans Day ceremony, Marcus continued, his voice softening slightly in the face of Samuel's calm presence. Chairs, platform, sound system. Legal department says no unauthorized volunteers until setup is officially approved. Liability issues, you understand. Samuel reached into his bag and withdrew a small wooden sign, hand-lettered with careful block strokes. Remember them right. He placed it gently beside the walkway, a simple statement that carried the weight of commandment. Did you make that? Marcus asked, his clipboard wavering. He makes one every year, came a voice from behind the hedgerow. Elena Rodriguez emerged from between the trees, her park maintenance uniform bearing the honest stains of someone who worked with her hands. And I leave it exactly where he places it, every single time. Marcus's authority seemed to deflate slightly. It's not standard procedure. Elena's weathered face creased into something between a smile and a challenge. He's been honoring these graves longer than your procedures have existed. But if it's not city-issued, then issue it, she said simply, bending to collect litter that others had overlooked. Marcus turned back to Samuel, but the older man had already moved to another memorial, now kneeling beside the plaque of Sergeant Diana Fletcher, 1955 to 1984. Samuel brushed pine needles from the engraved letters, with the same tenderness he'd shown the first, his jacket pulling tight across his shoulders, and revealing more of the mysterious patch. From a nearby bench, elderly Mr. Patterson raised a trembling hand in salute, his daily tribute to a ritual he'd witnessed for nearly 2 decades. That man's been doing this since before my oldest grandchild was born, Elena whispered. Never asked for recognition, never wanted thanks. Marcus crossed his arms, his discomfort with the situation manifesting as misplaced bravado. Still wearing that old jacket, though, he said, his voice pitched to carry. Probably time for an upgrade. Elena's eyes flashed with protective anger. But Samuel simply paused in his work, glanced down at the frayed patch, and pulled his collar higher with unhurried dignity. He stood, nodded respectfully to Mr. Patterson, and walked toward the park's exit without a backward glance. Marcus bent to retrieve the handmade sign, holding it as if weighing its worth against his rulebook. Elena stepped beside him, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who understood true service. "You really don't know, do you?" she asked. Marcus shrugged. "Know what?" The day truth walked forward, the November wind cut through Memorial Gardens like a blade, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter's approach. Folding chairs creaked beneath their occupants as the Riverside Community Band played a solemn melody that seemed to rise and fall with the breeze itself. Paper flags planted by elementary students lined the pathways, their bright colors a stark contrast to the solemnity of the occasion. It was Thursday, November 11th, and Riverside was observing Veterans Day with the earnest imperfection that marked all small-town ceremonies, heartfelt, slightly chaotic, and utterly sincere. Marcus Webb stood at the podium, one hand gripping the microphone stand while the other shuffled note cards with increasing desperation. His navy blazer was too light for the weather and too new to inspire confidence. He'd already stumbled over Lieutenant Morrison's name, pronouncing it as Lieutenant Morimoto, and his recovery had only made the error more pronounced. "Please join me in welcoming our guest of honor," Marcus announced, his voice cracking slightly. Retired General Catherine Hayes, decorated veteran of the 82nd Airborne and recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Veterans and their spouses, teachers herding restless students, city officials, and curious teenagers who'd been promised extra credit for attendance. General Hayes emerged from the side path, flanked by two ROTC cadets, whose pressed uniforms gleamed in the filtered sunlight. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd earned her authority in places where failure meant more than embarrassment. Her dress uniform bore the weight of decades of service, and her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow managed to look both professional and elegant. Her eyes, sharp as winter frost, swept the crowd with the practiced assessment of someone trained to read terrain and people with equal skill. The general ascended the platform steps, acknowledged Marcus with a professional nod, and began to turn toward the microphone. Then she stopped. Her gaze had found something in the crowd that made her freeze mid-motion. There, on the far right bench beneath the ancient oak tree, sat Samuel Torres. His hands rested atop a walking cane he hadn't needed the previous week, and his coat was zipped only halfway, revealing the faded triangular patch beneath his folded arms. His head was bowed slightly, his cap pulled low, not in disrespect, but in the quiet dignity of someone who carried memories too heavy for casual display. General Hayes didn't speak. She stepped off the platform. The crowd stilled, confusion rippling through the assembled chairs like wind through wheat. The band's melody trailed off into uncertain silence. The only sounds were the whisper of fabric as people shifted to see what had captured their honored guests' attention and the distant flutter of flags overhead. She walked across the grass with measured steps, her boots making no sound on the damp earth. Every eye followed her progress as she stopped before Samuel's bench. Without hesitation, without theatricality, she straightened to attention and brought her right hand to her brow in a salute so crisp and precise it seemed to cut through the very air. Gasps echoed through the crowd. A woman clutched her husband's sleeve. A teacher dropped her program, the papers scattering like autumn leaves. One child, no older than 7, pointed with wide eyes and whispered, "That's Mr. Samuel from the diner." Marcus's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. His carefully prepared note cards fluttered to the ground, forgotten in the face of something far more significant than his scripted remarks. General Hayes held her salute longer than protocol required, longer than ceremony demanded. When she finally lowered her hand, her voice carried clearly across the hushed gathering, each word weighted with the authority of someone who understood the true meaning of honor. "That patch," she said, her eyes never leaving Samuel's weathered face, "was earned by only 7 men in the history of our military. He's the last one still with us." Silence spread outward like ripples on still water. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath. suddenly understanding they were witnessing something sacred, something that couldn't be planned or rehearsed. A boy in the front row leaned toward his friend and whispered with newfound awe, "That's the guy who cleans the memorials." Samuel sat motionless for a long moment, carved from the same enduring stone as the monuments around him. Then, with movements that spoke of muscle memory forged in distant places under dangerous skies, he stood slowly and returned the salute with quiet precision. As if summoned by the moment's gravity, a single trumpet began to play taps, the haunting melody rising above the trees and settling over the gathering like a benediction. The empty chair for the first time in 15 years, the corner booth at Murphy's Diner sat empty, but Samuel's presence lingered like morning mist, impossible to ignore even in absence. Marcus Webb pushed through the cherry-red door with uncharacteristic hesitance, the familiar brass bell announcing his arrival to a space that felt somehow different, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Outside, grey clouds pressed against the windows, and yesterday's rain still beaded on the glass like unshed tears. He didn't need to scan the room to find what he was looking for. His eyes went directly to Samuel's booth, where the worn vinyl seat cushion remained unimpressed by human weight. But there, folded with military precision atop the table where countless plates of pancakes had rested, lay Samuel's jacket. The triangular patch was fully visible for the first time Marcus could remember, no longer hidden by folds or shadows. Beside the jacket lay a diner receipt, blank except for a timestamp and in Rita's flowing cursive, the simple notation: Samuel Toro's, regular customer, extraordinary man. Tucked beneath the jacket's hem was a napkin, folded with the same careful precision. Marcus approached slowly, setting his briefcase on the opposite bench as if entering a shrine. He sat with the careful reverence of someone finally understanding the weight of holy ground. The napkin bore 5 words written in blue ink: "Some honors need no ceremony." Marcus exhaled slowly, his eyes tracing the jacket's worn fabric, the patches that told stories he was only beginning to understand. The frayed cuffs, the faded color, the careful repairs, all of it spoke of a life lived with purpose beyond recognition. Rita appeared at his elbow with 2 coffee mugs, one already steaming. She slid into the seat across from him with the wariness of someone who'd spent the night processing loss. "Didn't expect to see you here so early," she said gently. "Did he say anything before he left?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just asked me to make sure his usual table stayed free for a while," Rita replied. "Said someone might need it more than he did." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "That story you told about your grandson." Rita's eyes softened with memory. Tommy was 8, chasing a ball into the street. Samuel moved faster than a man his age should have been able to. Took the hit from that delivery truck without thinking twice. 3 cracked ribs and a concussion, but he wouldn't even let us call an ambulance. Just smiled and said boys needed to learn to look both ways. "And you never told anyone?" "Wasn't my story to tell," she said simply. The door chimed again, admitting Elena Rodriguez. She shook droplets from her park maintenance jacket and made her way to their booth, sliding in beside Rita. "Figured I'd find you 2 here," she said, her withered hands folding on the table. "Thought I should add my piece to the puzzle." Marcus gestured toward the jacket. "Please." 3 winters ago, ice storm knocked out power to the entire memorial section. City couldn't get a crew out until Monday, but Saturday morning every single headstone was cleared, every pathway salted and safe. Found out later Samuel had worked through the night with nothing but a flashlight and a snow shovel. Even replaced the burnt-out bulbs in the entrance lamps with his own money. Rita smiled knowingly. "That sounds like him." He signed the supply receipt as Torres. "Night crew," Willenient continued. Like he was just another city employee doing his job. Marcus stared at the patch again, finally seeing it clearly. He was right there the whole time. Every single day. He never left, Elena agreed. Just didn't need spotlights to do what needed doing. From the old jukebox in the corner, a familiar melody began to play. something slow and wistful from the 1940s that made the older customers nod in recognition. Marcus reached for the jacket with hands that trembled slightly, lifting it as if handling something infinitely precious. Across the diner, a young boy raised his hand and waved. It was Tommy Jr., Rita's grandson, now wearing a denim jacket decorated with small American flag pins. Marcus blinked, then returned the wave with something approaching understanding. He stood, holding the jacket against his chest like armor. I need to find him. The keeper of Stories Riverside's library didn't boast digital databases or computerized catalogs, but it had something far more valuable. Margaret Sullivan, the head librarian whose memory was better than any search engine ever built. The heavy oak door announced Marcus's arrival with its customary squeal, and warm air enveloped him like an embrace, carrying the comforting sense of old paper and lemon oil. Margaret sat behind the reference desk, her silver hair pinned in a neat bun, working on a crossword puzzle with the methodical precision of someone who understood that patience was often the key to finding answers. The bronze owl pin on her cardigan caught the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. "Well," she said without looking up, "took you long enough." Marcus paused mid-step. "Excuse me?" "Figured you'd be here by noon at the latest. Man leaves behind a jacket and a mystery. Someone's bound to want the rest of the story." She finally lifted her eyes, and Marcus saw the knowing smile of someone who'd been expecting this conversation for years. "How did you know I'd?" Rita called. "Said you had the look of someone trying to read hieroglyphics without a translation key." Margaret rose with the deliberate movements of someone who'd spent decades navigating the narrow spaces between towering bookshelves. "I was in school with Samuel's sister, Rebecca Torres. Quiet family. Too quiet sometimes, considering what they carried." She led him through a corridor lined with faded literacy campaign posters toward the archive room, where afternoon sunlight slanted through high windows, making the dust motes dance like golden snow. "You won't find Samuel Torres in any Google search," Margaret continued, powering up an old microfilm reader with practiced efficiency. "But the truth is curled up in these archives, waiting for someone who cares enough to look." She fed a reel into the machine with movements worn smooth by repetition. "Start around 1973. Southeast Asian operations, classified rescue missions. Look for bylines from a reporter named Kenneth Walsh. He was local, but he followed up on stories about missing soldiers that others wouldn't touch." Marcus scrolled through headlines, his eyes adjusting to the pale blue glow of the screen. The work was slow, meditative, like archaeological excavation. Somewhere between page 52 and 58, he stopped breathing. "Here," he whispered. Margaret leaned over his shoulder. The headline read, "7 rescued from midnight drop. Hero remains unnamed." Below it, a single paragraph that changed everything. Survivors report an unidentified airman successfully navigated an improvised evacuation under complete blackout conditions after pilot was killed on impact. The airman carried 3 wounded soldiers over 4 miles of hostile terrain before reaching extraction point. Witnesses identify him only by a triangular patch, an insignia not yet documented in official military records. Margaret whistled softly. "That's our Samuel, all right. Why didn't anyone ever follow up?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with emotion. "Oh, they tried," Margaret replied. "Reporters knocked on doors, officials made inquiries. But Samuel Torres never answered questions about what happened over there. He just came home, found that booth at Murphy's, and started showing up at the memorial every Monday morning like clockwork." The Sunday pilgrimage that afternoon, Marcus found Samuel's address listed in the old phone book, tucked between Torres, Maria, and Torres, William. The house was a modest rental on Elm Street, set back from the road behind a gate that had seen better decades. The mailbox rattled empty when he opened it, and his knock on the front door echoed unanswered through what felt like an abandoned space. The curtains were drawn tight, giving no hint of life within. Marcus stepped back, uncertain what he'd expected. Perhaps a man in uniform answering the door, or the warm glow of lamplight through windows. Instead, he found only silence and shadows. Looking for Samuel, called a voice from the neighboring porch. An elderly man with kind eyes and a cane leaned against his railing, studying Marcus with the patient curiosity of someone who'd watched many strangers come looking for his elusive neighbor. "Yes, I'm Marcus. I work with the city." "Name's William Patterson," the man replied. "Known Samuel since 1967, when he first moved to the street. He won't be back today." Marcus stepped closer. "Do you know where I might find him?" Mr. Patterson tapped his cane against the porch steps. "Every Sunday, 3 p.m. sharp. Veteran section of Hillcrest Cemetery. Rain or shine, 30 years running. Every Sunday. Every Sunday I can remember." "He's not hiding, son. He just doesn't need to be found by most folks." Marcus nodded, understanding flickering like candlelight in his chest. Back home, he sat at his kitchen table with a red pen and circled the coming Sunday on his calendar with firm, deliberate strokes. This time, Samuel wouldn't walk alone. Where honor meets understanding at exactly 3 p.m. on Sunday, Samuel Torres knelt beside Lieutenant Sullivan's headstone in the veteran section of Hillcrest Cemetery, his movements carrying the weight of 3 decades of ritual. Without his jacket, wearing only a simple gray sweater, he seemed smaller, somehow more vulnerable, but no less dignified. The white chrysanthemum in his weathered hand rested against his leg as he cleaned the memorial stone with gentle precision. Around him, golden leaves spiraled down from ancient oaks, gathering at the corners of headstones like prayers made visible. Marcus approached without announcement, his footsteps soft on the leaf-strewn path. When he reached Samuel's side, he didn't speak. Instead, he knelt and placed his own white flower beside the headstone, their blooms leaning toward each other like old friends sharing secrets. They remained in silence for long minutes, 2 men from different generations united by newfound understanding. Finally, Samuel placed his flower at the base of the grave and spoke, his voice rough with emotion but steady as bedrock. He was 24, Samuel said. Had a laugh that could cut through radio static. Called me Cap, even though I was younger. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. Always carried a photo in his helmet liner. A girl with dark hair and a smile that could stop time. I never asked her name. Always meant to. Marcus waited, understanding that some stories couldn't be rushed. I come every year, Samuel continued, because I can, because he can't. Samuel turned slightly, meeting Marcus's eyes for the first time. Why are you here? The answer came easier than Marcus expected. Because I should have listened sooner. Samuel didn't nod or smile, but he didn't walk away either. In that simple acceptance, Marcus found something he hadn't known he was searching for. The voice of quiet service that evening, Riverside High School's auditorium buzzed with the restless energy of teenagers forced to attend an assembly. Programs rustled like autumn leaves as students shifted in plastic seats. Teachers lined the walls with varying degrees of enthusiasm, and parents scattered throughout the crowd like sentinels of propriety. A banner stretched across the stage proclaimed, Career Day. Voices who serve. Samuel stood in the wings, wearing a simple charcoal sweater and pressed slacks, no name tag adorning his chest. Marcus joined him, holding a folded letter like a talisman. You sure about this? Marcus asked. Samuel's response was immediate. One condition, no applause. When Samuel stepped to the podium, the murmurs quieted with surprising speed. He adjusted the microphone once, his movements economical and precise. I was asked to talk about service, he began, his voice carrying clearly without strain. Service isn't always wearing a uniform. Sometimes it's doing what needs doing when no one's watching. He paused, letting the silence settle like snow. When I was 20, I carried a wounded soldier 4 miles through hostile territory. He kept saying, don't stop, keep walking. I listened then, and I've never forgotten it. Samuel's eyes found individual faces in the crowd. Young, unlined, full of possibility. You'll be told to speak up. Sometimes you should. Other times, you'll need to be quiet and carry what others can't. The choice isn't always yours, but how you choose matters. Marcus stepped forward, unfolding the letter with reverence. This is from General Hayes, he announced. She wanted me to share her words. The best heroes don't seek recognition. They listen. They notice what's needed and do it, without expecting credit. Samuel Torres reminds us what true service looks like. Near the back of the auditorium, a girl wiped tears from her cheeks. A boy in ROTC uniform sat straighter in his chair. A hand rose from the third row. A tall student with wire-rimmed glasses and a notebook covered in careful notes. What did the patch mean? The student asked. Samuel looked at him for a long moment, then answered with quiet certainty. It meant I went where others couldn't. The auditorium held its breath. No one applauded. No one needed to. The legacy lives on. Later that week, Marcus returned to the library one final time. Margaret met him at the door with a knowing smile and a brass key. Display case, north wall. She said simply, left shelf. Inside the glass case, folded with military precision, lay Samuel's jacket. The triangular patch faced outward now, illuminated by a single spotlight that caught every thread, every story woven into its faded fabric. Beneath it, engraved on a brass nameplate, were 3 simple words. He reminded us. Marcus stood before the display with Tommy Jr., Rita's grandson, who tugged at his father's sleeve with wide-eyed curiosity. Can I own a patch like his someday? The boy asked. Marcus knelt to the child's level, seeing Samuel's quiet dignity reflected in those young eyes. You already have, Tommy. You just have to decide what to do with it. The quiet echo. Samuel Torres never needed applause, and perhaps that's what made his silent presence resonate louder than any speech ever could. What some dismissed as just an old jacket became a reminder that dignity and sacrifice rarely announce themselves with fanfare. Kindness doesn't always carry a megaphone. Worth isn't measured in newness or shine. Sometimes it's the worn things, the weathered faces, the ones who stand in grateful silence, that carry the most profound weight. If this story has stayed with you, perhaps it's because you too have known someone who taught more by showing up than by speaking out. Someone who understood that the most important work often happens in shadows, witnessed only by those who need it most. And perhaps, like Samuel, we all have chances each day to remind someone what quiet honor looks like, not in grand gestures or public recognition, but in the simple act of showing up, carrying what needs carrying, and serving without expecting to be served in return. In Riverside, the corner booth at Murphy's Diner remains Samuel's, even in his absence. Rita still pours coffee for an empty chair every morning at 6:42 a.m., and the jacket in the library display case continues to teach lessons that no textbook could capture. Some honors, after all, need no ceremony. They live in memory, in changed hearts, and in the quiet understanding that true service rarely seeks the spotlight. It simply shows up, day after day, carrying light into whatever darkness it finds. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.